Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and oh my god, we're doing this again. Look, if you guys remember back in 2019, there was a slew of fall TV pilots that were coming out, and I decided it would be a great idea for me to compile an entire video about each and every one of them. I talked about what I liked, what I disliked, and if I thought those shows were going to ultimately stick around. Most of them I was not correct about. I will say that right now. I was not very accurate. Like Bob Hart's Abishola, for example, that's still going on right now. Literally, they just had their season premiere tonight. I don't know how, but it's still going. And great, I guess, because people seem to like it. Wonderful. But a lot of the shows I've talked about did not make it as far as as I thought they were going to. Even some of the ones I liked didn't make it as far as I thought they would. So I figured, you know what? Even though I was not the most accurate in terms of predictions, we're going to do it again because we didn't get to do it last year, obviously. There were no fall pilots at all because of everything pretty much just being backed up with COVID and things like that, them not being able to shoot anything. There were no pilots to talk about, except for, obviously, cable ones, but I don't do a video like that because of the fact that I'm probably gonna end up reviewing those anyway, and this is more, the reason I'm doing it is so I actually have motivation to talk about these. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start off with this first one here. Once again, I'm gonna go through each of these as much as I can. I'm not sure when this video is gonna get done. It's whenever I've been able to watch all these pilots. I will say right now there are not nearly as many as there were last time, and I think it's mainly just because of the fact that, again, COVID just delayed a bunch of shows. I think some shows that they wanted to come out haven't finished filming yet, so either they didn't finish filming on time or they're going to be out in January. So maybe there'll be a follow-up video to this in January when there's even more stuff coming out. But for now, we're going to go ahead, focus on the ones that are coming out this fall season, starting off with this first one. Alright, so the first one we're going to be discussing is a show called The Big Leap, and I'm not going to lie, I was actually kind of interested in this one. It's a musical, but it's not the kind of musical that you normally see a show do, because it's also, trying to parody, reality TV shows, say, So You Think You Can Dance and things like that, so this really seemed like something that could be a lot of fun, and I will say, from the looks of this pilot, I actually did enjoy this quite a bit. It's not perfect, there definitely are quite a few things that do bring it down, but I really do enjoy the general premise here. I like the idea that we are focusing on all of these different characters, all of which have not really been as successful as they've wanted to in life. Whether it's Teri Polo's character, who is this woman that just can't seem to gain relevance because she's very out of touch with the newer generation, and so she thinks that going on this show could maybe help her turn that around. Whether it's the character of Mike, who he's kind of going through some separation issues with his wife. She's left him, and since then he has kind of been in a place where he's just feeling a little bit directionless, so I really, I'm interested in seeing what they do there. Or, for me, the best character of this episode is our main character, Gabby. I liked her a lot. I thought that she was easily the character that I latched onto the most. I really enjoyed her story, where she is this woman that, she was a senior in high school. Everything was going great for her. She had this acceptance letter to NYU. She's always wanted to be a dancer of sorts. In fact, she's very talented, but all of that was upended by the arrival of her child. She did, in fact, have a pregnancy of sorts, and since then, she's kind of put all of that on the back burner, been a single mom, and now she has this opportunity to really kind of turn things around in her life. And I will say right off the bat, she probably not only was my favorite character, but I think she's also given the strongest performance in the entire show. I've never really seen this actress before, but I think this is a really great start for her. Simone Rickasner, I believe is how you pronounce her name. I really enjoyed her performance in this. I thought that she was very likable. She's really fun to watch, and I really did like going on this journey with her. She's definitely the character that I feel the most attached to right now. And that is where we get into one of my issues with the show. There are a lot of characters. I will definitely say that right off the bat. There's a lot of characters here that we're following, and because of that, sometimes it can get a little overwhelming. I'm not gonna lie to you. The first 9 minutes of this, I was having a hard time keeping track of everything because they were moving so quickly throughout everything, and that's really, I think, my bigger issue with the show, is that I do think the show is very rushed in this first episode. There are a lot of things they kind of cycle through here that I think they should have definitely taken a bit more time with, because I think it would have been that much more impactful if they had done that. And I think as a result, there's some things that I just wasn't as invested in. There's two relationships we're already focusing on. One of them is Gabby. She's paired up with this guy Reggie, who, you know, basically she fails at like her first audition and it's not going well for her at all, but then she basically is told that if she can get this guy Reggie, who really wants nothing to do with this show at all, to dance, then, you know, basically she can be on the show. Long story short, she does in fact get him to dance. There seems to be some romantic chemistry there. I'm fine with that story. I just felt like they really kind of rushed through that relationship already. It feels like we're already going very quickly with those two, and I just wish they would have slowed down a bit. But the larger issue, I would say, in terms of the romances, is the other one we focus on. The character of Mike, I'll just say right now, is easily my least favorite storyline right now. And it's nothing against the actor. Like, I think the actor's doing a fine job. It's just that his story feels incredibly rushed. Everything with him, I'm just having a really hard time latching onto it. You know, when he's flirting with Piper Parabo's character, I don't have a problem with her. I just kind of feel like she's here just to be like his love interest. Like, there really isn't much to her as a character so far. And then he runs into his wife. That felt like a scene in like the second or like the fourth or fifth episode of the show. It did not feel like a scene in the first episode. So I really felt like they were kind of like rushing through stuff with him. But I did think that I was kind of won over by the scene of his friend talking to him and being like, you know, you don't want your wife back. You just want things back to normal because you can't really picture a life without her. So that's something that I think could be really compelling. The idea that he doesn't really know what his life is when his wife isn't involved. I think that could be a good storyline for him, and I hope they do end up focusing on that. But the thing that really does make this show, I think, is the cast. All of them are just so likable and fun. And the show is also really funny. There are a lot of lines that definitely did have me laughing here. Whether it's the recurring joke that the guy that Gabby ended up hooking up with, that, you know, she was dating, turned out to be gay. I think that's, you know, I was not sure how that was going to go, but I actually thought that joke worked pretty well. And I like what they're doing with Justin as a character. He's not just this one joke character. There seems to be a bit more to him. I like that these two are still friends. I really love the scene that they had in the bowling alley. I think in terms of dancing, that was probably the one that stuck out the most to me. I really love the way that whole sequence was handled, and I think these people are generally very talented. Like, you can tell this is a very talented cast, and so I think it's very easy to kind of buy into the fun of it all, and so I think that works really well in the show. But I also think they're doing a really good job at actually showing just how sleazy, you know, these producers can be. I mean, we get the sense very early on, these producers don't really care about the talent. They care much more just about the stories. You know, is it like this heartbreak, you know, this sob story that's really going to, you know, help their ratings and things like that? Or can they exploit some sort of tragedy within these characters' life? Can they try to create unnecessary drama? It kind of is evocative of something we'd see on Unreal, but I would say a more lighthearted version of that. I don't see this show going quite as dark as that one did. And maybe they'll prove me wrong. Maybe they'll go in some like really dark directions, but right now I don't really see this show going in that direction. I see it being a little bit more lighthearted in that way. In fact, I honestly would compare it more to the show Smash that came out on NBC. Now, that show was not exactly the most successful. It only had 2 seasons, and as we know, it was canceled after the second season because nobody was really watching it. But I do think the show, the thing that really separates is that it doesn't take itself super seriously, and I think that's what works really well about it. But I do think that also works against the show because it can be a little uneven at points. The biggest scene for me that really just kind of like came out of nowhere is the scene with Gabby and Reggie where, you know, they're on their date, everything's going great, and then Reggie just like beats up all these guys that like tries to hit on Gabby, and he like gets into this whole fight, gets arrested, and then it's just like not talked about again. It felt like that was just kind of shoehorned in there because the show really wants to like address all of these modern issues. It wants to focus it in modern times. There's points where the characters will often harken back to like the fact that we were on lockdown a year ago, so you can tell they want this to be very current, and I think sometimes it works and sometimes it just feels a little out of nowhere. So I'm not really sure how that's going to play out overall. I think it's just one of those things where it's the first episode. I think they're still finding their groove a bit, but I think in general, this show is definitely a lot of fun. There are a lot of things I did enjoy about it. I enjoyed the dancing. I was a little bit thrown off. I thought this was going to be like a full-on musical, but it seems to be more of a danceicle, which I'm fine with. I just think it's a little misleading because the trailer kind of hinted at the fact that it was going to be, you know, them bursting out into song, which at least in this episode, we don't really get anything like that. But like I said, I really do appreciate how much the show does want to spoof reality television. I think it does a good job with that. I think the cast here is very likable, and I think overall it's a really good like feel-good show that I think people are really going to enjoy. And I mean, we can already see here, like, when it comes to Scott Foley's character, like, he is doing whatever he can to try to dig deep into who these people are, how he can really use that, like, to his advantage. He wants to, like, turn two characters against each other, so I'm interested in seeing how that's gonna go, but also seeing him clash with the other producers, who it already seems like, you know, they don't really like his, you know, him doing things this way. They kind of want things to be a bit more by the book, and not Mallory Jansen. She's definitely very savage in that way. We definitely see that from her character, but I'm interested in seeing where that whole dynamic goes. I think there's a lot of potential for what they can really do with this show overall. Like I said, I hope they're able to dive into these characters a bit more, because while I really did, by the time this first episode ended, at least feel intrigued by every storyline and at least like where they're headed with these characters, I want to feel a little bit more of an attachment to them, because right now I really just feel an attachment to Gabby, and I think it's because that's the character we focus the most on. I think the other characters, you know, are kind of just like, they're, you know, I'm here, I like them, I do, but I think they're a little bit underwritten right now, and I hope they're able to improve upon that in the next few episodes, but we'll have to see. I'm definitely going to stick around with this show, though. I'm definitely going to try to watch more of it and see how it plays out, because I think it has a lot of potential for sure, but we'll really just have to see how this one turns out overall. The question is, do I think this is actually going to last? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure, because I feel like shows like this, it can go 50-50. You know, this could be like a Glee where it's insanely successful and gets all these seasons and goes on forever. Or this could be like, say, Smash or Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, where it starts off really strong, everyone's talking about it, and then it has a second season and really just kind of like dips in viewership. Not necessarily dips in quality, but dips in viewership. So I'm not really sure how the show is going to do ratings wise. I don't really know how it's going to play out, but I think the fact they did put the first two episodes online early before the pilot came out, like, on, you know, officially, I think is definitely, like, a good sign. I think they have a lot of faith in this show, and I think that's good, because I do think this show definitely does have a lot of potential for sure. So yeah, I overall really did enjoy this one. I know there were a lot of thoughts there. I know I do have some complicated feelings with some things. I think some of the plot lines here, Teri Polo's storyline, I have no idea where that's going, with, like, her husband and him, like, being addicted to porn, and then him now being into the dancing, but for a different reason. I'm not really sure where they're headed with that, but again, I really like this cast. I think it's really fun. I was generally laughing at a lot of moments throughout this. I really enjoyed pretty much every single character. I did find myself latching onto them, even some of the ones like Mike that I thought were a little clunky. I think overall, you know, if they're able to flesh out these characters a bit more, and they're able to find their groove a bit, I really do think the show could really develop into something special So I am going to give this first episode overall a B-. I think it's a really good start to this pilot season, and I hope that the rest of the pilots I'm talking about are as good as this one. It's not perfect, it's not an amazing pilot, but it's a good way to start things off, and I think it's a pretty solid start to what hopefully can be a good fall TV season, but we'll have to see with the next ones I'm talking about, which I'll check in with you guys then. Alright guys, so I just got done watching the pilot for Ordinary Joe, and I have to say, this show was very different from what I initially expected to be. I kind of went into this thinking it was going to be more like Lone Star, coincidentally another show that James Wolk has done, but it's much different than that, I think. It was a lot more endearing and feel good than I really was expecting it to. Now, I will get the elephant out of the room. James Wolk is a very likable and charismatic actor, and that definitely rings true with this show, but for some reason, whenever he has a show that comes out in the fall that's on a major network, it normally just doesn't do well, and I don't think it's his fault. I just think it tends to happen a lot. It happened, like I said, with that show Lone Star. It happened with the Crazy Ones on CBS, which I reviewed for a little bit. I really hope it doesn't happen with the show, though, because I think this is probably the most exciting of the ones he's done yet. I mean, one of the things I really do love about the show is that, yeah, the concept of the what-if scenarios, you know, it's something that we have seen before, but it has a lot more in common with the musical If Then than what I was really expecting it to. I mean, what I really like about this show is that, you know, similar to that musical, while there are events that are changed, a lot of the same things still happen. Like, for example, you know, whether he's with Amy or Jenny, things are still kind of turning out the same way. Certain events still play out in the same way, and that's something I really did appreciate, because you get to see different scenarios play out throughout these three timelines, but the events are relatively the same, and I thought that was a very interesting approach, you know, with Amy and how she's going to take over for Diaz and become this congresswoman of sorts. I think that could be a really interesting story overall, and that's something that isn't necessarily changed. This character of Diaz, I will say, his storyline didn't really work as well as I wanted to. I didn't really feel that attached to that character, and I wasn't really super connected to him, but I like how in each timeline, like, similar events play out, where there's a shooting of sorts, and in one timeline, like, Joe's able to, you know, escape this shooting. He's able to save him from the other one. He's not really able to, and he has to now, like, save his life and things like that when he's a doctor. I thought that was a really interesting idea, what they decided to do there. You know, when it comes to his relationship with Amy, the fact, or his relationship with Jenny. Again, I wasn't super into it at first. I thought it was very cliche, where it's like, oh, their relationship is not in a great spot. We can see that he is kind of like a workaholic. He's not really putting in the time to take care of his son. But when we get to that scene at the end where, you know, she's divorced him, but now they are changing, you know, they're dancing and things like that, I thought that was a really good moment. But the one thing I really do like is her son. I really enjoy the relationship between Joe and his son, or her son in some timelines. I really do enjoy that bond that they have. I think that his character is someone that is very endearing. The child that's playing him, I think, is doing a really good job in that role, where he, you know, is paralyzed in that way, and you can see that bond really forming. And I really like the revelation at the end of this episode, where we find out in the Rockstar, in the you know, in the police timeline, that basically he does in fact have a son. He didn't know that he had a son, and now he's going to try to track him down. He's going to try to, you know, find his son after this. This is in the musician's timeline of sorts, and he's now gonna, you know, he finds out she put the child up for adoption, and now he's gonna try to find out, you know, to track him down and maybe, you know, connect with him in that way. So I'm excited to see how that all plays out. I think that's something that I was definitely very hooked into, and for me, I think the Rockstar timeline easily became the most interesting, because it's going in the most different direction of the few. I think the other ones, it's not that they aren't going in different directions. Like, We do have the storyline with where he's with, where he's an officer. He's not with either of the women, but he does end up meeting them. He reconnects with Amy while he's like investigating the shooter, and then he encounters Jenny, who has become very successful, with paralegal stuff, and basically, she's raising her son Lucas pretty much. It has a different name in this timeline, but it's the same child, which was an interesting idea. I didn't really know how that made sense, but at least he had a different name, so I was okay with that. So again, I think they are doing a good job of doing something different in each of these timelines, but the other thing I really did appreciate is that, because we're in 3 different timelines, this could get very confusing. We're constantly jumping back and forth, and it does sometimes feel like we've missed some moments from this character's life because we cut from him graduating and trying to figure out what path he's going to take to then 10 years later, him choosing his career path. It does feel like sometimes there's information that's lost, but I wouldn't ever say that this is a confusing show, because what I think they did a really good job with is cleverly finding ways to make Joe look distinct. Whether in one timeline he has a cut on his head, whether he has glasses in another one, he's got a different hairstyle in one of them. It's a really good way of getting us to understand, to recognize, like, oh, we're in this timeline. Oh, that's what's going on here. Oh, that's what he's pursuing. It's a good way to do that and not make it seem like we need to just spoon feed everything to the viewer. It's just a very subtle thing that they did, and that's something that I really did appreciate overall. I thought they did a really good job with that. And I think James Wolk, I already said he's very likable and charismatic here, but I think he's getting to show like different sides of himself throughout this show when he's a rock star. Like, I had no idea that he could sing like that, and I think that he's definitely very talented, so that's something that I really did appreciate overall. Just in general, I was very surprised by how well thought out and clever this show is. I think there is a lot more that it's doing than I really was expecting it to. I do think there are some aspects that are a bit underwritten, like for example, the Eric character isn't really doing much for me. I like Charlie Barnett, but he kind of just seems like the hype man to Joe. Like, he's the one who's like, oh, well, I told you to do this, I told you to do this, and I'm just not really super into his character right now. I hope they're able to maybe dive a bit deeper into their friendship overall, because I do think that is a pretty important component of the show, and right now it's just not really there for me. But in general, I thought the show was way better written than I really did expect it to. I think there's a lot of interesting places that it can go, especially in 3 different timelines where, like I said, similar events are happening, but there are definitely some clear differences, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this show really does play out. And I really do hope that it is successful, because I do think that in general, like, there aren't many shows out there that are quite like this. Like, yeah, we've had shows where it's like what if scenarios, but I don't think we've had an entire show centering around that in quite a bit. So I really do think this show could end up being something very special. I also was surprised that this was created by Matt Reeves. I had no idea that he was like involved with this show, but I mean, it makes sense why it's so well written, because Matt Reeves is a fantastic director and writer, and I think we definitely get to see that here. So yeah, I enjoyed this pilot a lot. Like I said, it's not perfect. There are a few aspects that do bring it down, but overall, it's definitely the best of the ones I've seen so far. B+ for Ordinary Joe. Very surprised by how much I enjoyed this one. Really hope it ends up lasting. Again, I'm not going to try to predict if it does. I'm going to say right now, I'm very unsure just because of James Wolk's track record, but I am hoping by some miracle this show is able to survive, because I really am digging it so far. Alright, so I just got done watching the pilot for Our Kind of People, and this one I honestly don't have a lot to say about, because I really wasn't into it all that much. I was really hoping that this show could be something very special, but I think what really hinders it is that just in general, I think the show is way too over the top and cheesy. Just from the first scene alone, I thought there was just a lot of overacting. I thought the dialogue here especially wasn't really that great, and I think that's definitely something that does bring this down. I think there are some things that do work in this show, though. Acting-wise, I think it's pretty much a mixed bag, but there are 4 actors I think they're doing a really strong job here. First off, Yaya DaCosta. I've never seen her before, but she is really good here. She does a really good job of presenting, I think, the ambition that Angela really does have, how determined she is to like get to the bottom of things and make sure she can in fact find out more about her mother, because that's basically what this show is about. She's basically trying to like reclaim her family's name and tries to discover this dark secret about her mother's past. So I think she's doing a good job with that. I also really like Nadine Ellis a lot. I haven't seen her either, like her at all either, but I thought she did a pretty good job at playing Leah, someone who seems kind of stone cold. She's very rich. She is very rich, and you know, you think that she could be kind of bitchy in that way, but she did show that she has a lot more going on with her already, and I think that she did a pretty good job with that. Joe Morton maybe is the standout of this entire show. His monologue that he had, I thought that was probably the best moment of the episode for me. I really liked the way that whole scene ended up playing out. Unfortunately, there's not really a lot of other things I can say about this show that are very positive. I think the characters here in general are just very confusing to me. I don't really understand who most of them are. I had a very hard time latching onto really any of them, and I think the other big issue with the show is that it has just such a severe pacing issue. It is constantly moving through everything. The pilot feels so incredibly rushed, and I know I already talked about how like the Big Leap's pilot was really rushed, but honestly, the Big Leap was rushed in a way where it's like, okay, maybe they could have done a little bit more with this, but I think the story overall I'm able to understand. This one is so rushed that I really was having a hard time following what was going on, and I don't think they did a very good job with that at all. I also could not stand the storyline with Nikki's character. I think she's an incredibly annoying character. The way that she just wants to expose like the fact that I guess Leah is like this lesbian of sorts. I just don't really care about that story. I think it's really just kind of stupid. I don't really like where they're going with her at all. And I also just think that this show really should have played more into like a mystery aspect, because that's what really does intrigue me, is the idea of Angela's mother. She doesn't know a lot about her. You know, she slowly is like piecing things together, except here she's not slowly piecing things together. She pieces the entire fucking puzzle together, because we literally get the twist at the end of this episode that Joe Morton is both, is both Leah's father and also Angela's father. And it's like, I could have told you that. Like, this is not shocking to me. I didn't find that surprising in the slightest. I was not very surprised where that ended up going. I do like the idea of this being like a rich and the poor, they sort of team up. I don't think that's a bad idea, but just in general, it feels very cliche and rushed, and they're not really doing enough of it to stick out to me. I appreciate the fact the show wants to dive into some social commentary as well with like black struggles, but it really just feels shoehorned in there, and it's done in a very like surface level manner. It feels like it's here, so it's like, oh, our show is about something. It sticks out more, and I just didn't really think that worked very well at all. So yeah, I just wasn't a huge fan of this pilot, and I know that Lee Daniels is a producer of this, and you know, the other shows he's produced on Fox are like Empire and Star, and you know, Empire, I think the thing that separates Empire from, you know, other shows of its kind is that the first episode really hooks you into what's going on. You want to know more about Lucius. You want to see if this whole story, you know, who he's going to give the company to and things like that. You know, you don't know if he's going to survive with ALS or whatever. And even though they abandon that storyline, like they abandon a lot of other things in that show, it is generally compelling at first. It's a really strong pilot. Here, there just wasn't enough going on to really hook me in. The majority of this episode takes place at like these lavish parties, and I just could not care about anything that was really going on. And I don't really know if this show is going to last either. I don't really feel like there's going to be a lot of people that are like, really hooked on this show. I feel like the hook of this show has already been kind of spoiled. I think they definitely should have waited to do this reveal until much later into the show. Like, again, slowly piece things together. It's just way too fast-paced overall, and I think that's really just kind of bringing things down for me. So, in general, I just don't really think the show really worked for me overall. I don't know if it's really going to last or anything like that. So, yeah, I think this is easily the weakest pilot so far for me. Unfortunately, C for our kind of people. I didn't hate it, but it just really did not do much for me at the end of the day. Alright, so I just got done watching the pilot of the reboot of The Wonder Years, and I really liked it a lot. I have to say, this was probably one of the more interesting pilots to me, one of the ones I was actually really looking forward to, because even though, yes, it is a reboot, yes, it is kind of just like taking something that was popular in, say, like the 90s and sort of, aping off of that. What I really did like about this premise is that it's centered around a black family in the same time period, and there's a lot that you can do with that as a result. There was a lot of racial tension and things like that going on then, a lot of racism, and I think that's something that this show I was hoping would shed a lot of light on. And I mean, for the most part, yeah, it does a really good job with that. I mean, right in the beginning, they do such a great job of showing the parallels between 1968 and our current times. When Don Cheadle's doing that narration and he talks about how there was like some sickness and there was a lot of, racism, that was eroding the country and things like that. I mean, it's kind of crazy that not a lot has changed since then, and we really do kind of get to see that here. And let me just say, Don Cheadle is doing a really great job in this narration. He seems like he's having a lot of fun. I think he was a really good choice for this role overall, and I think that he does a really good job with that. And let me give you some background. Like, I haven't seen a ton of The Wonder Years, but of what I've seen, I'm a pretty big fan of the show. I think that it was something that was very wholesome. It was a nice time capsule of the 60s, but it also did a really good job of showing some very valuable life lessons and things like that. Fred Savage, I mean, how can you not, love him in the role? I mean, there's so much to love about that show, and I think a lot of that is translating pretty well here. The actor who plays Dean, I think, is really good. He's very likable, and I think he's someone that's just very easy to latch onto. And I think his predicament, it's going to be relatable to a lot of people because he is the youngest of the family, and he doesn't really know where he fits in with everything. And that's something that I really did like seeing in this first episode is, him kind of not really knowing where he fits into his family. So you see these kind of like distant from them overall. So I really did like him. I gotta say, the standout though for me might be Jewel Hill. I really love him in this role. He is very stern, but also very well cast, I think, and you can see that Bill is someone that, he really does want the best for his family. I loved the catchphrase that he had in this episode where he's just telling him to be cool constantly in, like, every tense situation. I really enjoyed that a lot. I think Jewel Hill's doing a great job, and I think that he was really well cast here, so I think they're doing a really good job with him. I will admit there are definitely some cliches in this show, like, his sister being a bit more rebellious than the rest of the family. That's something that we've seen before. The dad being stern, we've definitely seen that. And then the mom being a little bit more open to some of her son's more, controversial ideals. I think that's something else that we've seen before, but I think the show still does a good job with that. I think it still has like a certain charm and fun to it that's gonna help it be memorable. It doesn't necessarily stick out from other ABC sitcoms, especially when you have something like, say, Blackish on. I think that that's definitely, like, the superior show in terms of, like, an all-black family on ABC. That's a sitcom. I think definitely that's the more superior show, but I think The Wonder Years still does a lot of really good job. And the show's also really funny. Like, there's definitely a lot of lines that had me laughing. The biggest one for me was when he was talking talking about like the Google search, how like nowadays if something were to go down, they would like fact check it on Google. I thought that was a really clever line, and so I think the humor is very funny here for sure, and that's something that I really did appreciate. And they are doing a good job with the racial commentary, I think. You know, it definitely is blatant in this episode. They don't try to shy away from it, and that's something I really did appreciate. You know, when you see these white characters and you can see the way that, you know, our main characters are reacting to them, you know, worried what they're gonna say, how they're gonna act in front of them. I mean, it feels very realistic in that way, and I think the show's doing a good job with that. They're not trying to glamorize what was going on there at all, and I really did appreciate that overall. And I do think they did a good job with that. I think my only other real flaws with this show, I will say, is that at first I thought there were too many similarities to the Wonder Years, but then they do that twist at the end where he likes that girl, Kisa. You know, she's kind of like the Winnie of the show. And for a while I thought they were just going to kind of go in the same direction with her, where she's like a tough girl and he really likes her and they're going to connect at the end of the episode. But no, turns out his friend actually ends up kissing her at the end, which I thought was a really inspired change because it helps this show really stand out from the original. I don't really know how that's all gonna play out, and I think that's gonna be a really fun situation to see, you know, how they really do go about that from there. So I thought that was a really fun idea that they did. I will say the ending I thought was a bit shoehorned in. It sort of felt like because the first episode ends on a very serious note of the original show, they had to do the same thing here, where, you know, 1 second we just have Dean playing baseball, and then the next second this white family comes up to them and tells them that Dr. King was shot. I thought it was effective. Obviously, like, seeing their reaction was effective, but it's glossed over almost immediately, and it just kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. So while I think they're doing a good job with like the racial commentary, I felt like that was something that they just didn't really need to touch upon, at least in this episode. If they were going to do it in a future episode, but here it just didn't really fit the tone with what was going on. It didn't really seem like it had a place in this particular episode, so I don't think they did a great job with that. But overall, I do think the show has a lot of potential. I think there's a lot of different things that it can explore that the original wasn't really able to. Him having a white friend as well and him feeling really close to him, you know, I think that's an interesting sort of dynamic. I'm interested in seeing how that's all going to play out. I really do like the show quite a bit. I'd say the only other issue I have with it is that I do think there's a little bit of an over-reliance on narration. I understand that it has to be there, but it feels more like an obligation at points rather than something that just kind of like fits in naturally. There was a lot of it in this episode, and it's not like there wasn't in the original show, but I just felt that they were kind of overdoing it after a while, just so it's like, okay, this is still the Wonder Years, you still have narration, it's still in the 60s. It just felt a little bit forced in that way, but overall I enjoyed the show quite a bit. I thought it was very charming and fun. It's got a really likable cast, and I really do hope it ends up lasting. I'm not entirely sure how it's gonna do, like, longevity wise, but I do think the show could definitely get a pretty big audience, especially one that maybe grew up with the original show or one that didn't watch the original show and now it's sort of like a different demographic. I think there's a lot of possibilities for where the show can go moving forward, especially in terms of viewership, but I definitely do like what I see. I enjoyed this pilot quite a bit, and I am going to give it a B. Well, we've gotten to a point here where, unfortunately, we have watched a show that is almost all the way bad. La Brea is pretty terrible. There are a lot of aspects of the show that I really didn't like at all, and kind of reminds me why I don't normally go out of my way to watch stuff like this, because my God, I mean, first of all, the premise of the show is so ridiculously cheesy. You have this family, and right off the bat, you know, they're like talking in a car and there's this huge disaster that happens where it basically causes this like sinkhole to emerge and half of the family's like separated by it. And I will say, the opening sequence is actually pretty well constructed. You do feel how sudden this event is. You understand how dramatically it's going to change their lives. The weight of the actual disaster, it's very much there, and I think they do a pretty good job of that. Unfortunately, almost every other element of the show just didn't really work for me. I mean, again, like I said, the premise of the show is really dumb. The story of an estranged family, it's one that we really have seen so many times before, and we've seen it done much better than it really is here. I think what really does hurt this show is the rushed exposition we really do get for this family. Because of the fact that this event happened so quickly, we immediately have this time jump to like 2 or 3 years later, and there's so much that has gone on with them in that time. You know, the dad is in a very different place. He's sort of like regretting a lot of what's going on. You have his daughter who he is kind of struggling to, connect with in that way. And then on the other side of things, in this prehistoric land, you see them kind of struggling with what they are. And honestly, there was so much presented in this first episode, I couldn't even tell you what was going on to this family before the disaster occurred. They just presented things in such a rushed manner that I'm even struggling to remember details. I'm struggling to remember what this family is really going through, because everything they just kind of zoom through in this episode, and that was so again, just honestly headache inducing for me. It also doesn't help that most of the acting here is pretty bad. I didn't really feel there were many good actors here at all. Ian Macon especially, I thought was really bad here. He plays the father, and he's supposed to be this like grief-stricken father that's sort of like lost without his family. He doesn't really know how to go on, and nothing about his performance to me was convincing. Nothing about his performance, was something that I found myself latching onto. I found it to be so emotionally hollow and almost laughable at times, and I just was not a fan of it at all. It also doesn't help that this prehistoric land that these characters are in, it doesn't even look remotely tangible. I mean, you can tell this show is dirt cheap. All of the CGI is awful here. Even the sinkhole, the opening, I thought looked so bad. You could tell that it was fake. I mean, when it comes down to the prehistoric land, though, I feel like that's really when the low-budget effects do stick out here, because nothing about the land that Eve and Josh are on look even somewhat like a real place. I mean, this looks like a set. It looks like a green screen. You can feel, how much they are trying to cover it up, and it just does not really work at all here. It also, I think, is pretty clear what is going on from the first few minutes with the family being on this land. From the second they're there, oh, there's dinosaurs here. They're in some sort of prehistoric world. Like, that's obvious to me. And then the father, like, having these visions of his family and being told that he's crazy, being told that it's just like PTSD, he misses them. That these are real. That he somehow has these like psychic type visions. He's able to still see them in that way. So again, nothing about that was interesting to me. Every single beat with these characters, every single piece of dialogue is so terrible. It's so painfully on the nose. And not to mention, there's about a half a dozen other characters we meet in this episode that I couldn't even tell you what their purposes were. Similar to the family, I could not tell you who these characters are. I could not tell you anything about them. I mean, so many choices here were just so baffling to me. There is literally a line in this episode, I shit you not, where the characters are talking about an episode of Lost and how this situation is very similar. If that alone doesn't tell you how badly the show is trying to like emulate that and like be a full-on like imitation of it, I don't really know like what else does. I mean, just the way everything is constructed in this show. I know NBC has been doing this for years, but this is one of the most desperate attempts to cash in on that formula that I think I've ever seen. I mean, again, everything about it is so cheesy. It takes itself way too seriously. I couldn't for a second care about anything that's really going on here. The editing's also really bad. I mean, the way they're constantly cutting back and forth, I really think they should have done one episode either of the family in the prehistoric world or one episode of the family in this, like, the present day, in the real world. I think they could have done a much better job with that, and instead we have this really choppily edited pilot that just, honestly, honestly was so hard to follow and really just kind of took me out of things. Like, I couldn't even tell what was going on. It was honestly giving me whiplash at points with how much they were cutting back and forth between both characters. But I honestly feel the other big issue with this pilot, and the thing that makes me not even want to even, have any even try to like check out another episode, is the fact that there's simply just too much revealed here. I mean, especially at the end, the fact that we actually got a reveal of like the dinosaurs at the end of it. What even is the mystery in this show? We know the dad is now going to be searching out for his family. He knows that they're alive. He knows that these visions are real. So what even is the point now? What is the mystery? What is the intrigue here? He's going to reunite with his family. They're probably going to end up on this land together. They're going to discover something about these dinosaurs, whether the world is inhabitable for humans or whether they can coexist in that way. I mean, there just isn't much here to really latch onto. There isn't much here that really grabs me. And I feel like every idea this show goes about, it's so tired. It's so recycled. There's nothing here that feels fresh or exciting. It is just so cheesily written. It's such a desperate move to cash in on a show that is far better than this one. There are so many shows that have handled this concept better, even beyond Lost. I mean, there are so many shows that handled this better. Remember Terra Nova? I was thinking of that this entire pilot. That's not a very good show, like at all, but I was thinking how much better they structured that pilot compared to this just convoluted bullshit that I end up watching. This is easily the worst pilot I've seen so far. D+ for La Brea. This is absolutely the last time you'll hear me talk about the show. This is not the kind of stuff I usually talk about, and after watching this, I was very much reminded of why. I did not enjoy this one very much at all. I don't see the show lasting. It does not seem like too many people are liking it. I would be very surprised if the show even ends up lasting, because my god, was this bad. I gotta be honest, Ghost kind of did surprise me. I wasn't really expecting all that much from this show. In fact, of the ones I'm talking about, this is the one that I was least looking forward to. I thought overall they did not really do a good job with promoting the show. It looked very just kind of like obnoxious and cringy, but I didn't hate this pilot. I think what actually works really well are the ghosts. I really enjoyed the way the opening scene gets us to introduce to each ghost, the different time periods all of them are from. We have one character that is sort of this Thor type character where, he's from medieval times, and then on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have this party dude bro who's there. And I think the clashing between these characters, that's when the show works really well. There's a really great bit where they're constantly referencing like devices or different things throughout their times, and they just don't even know what they're talking about. And I thought that was actually a lot of fun to watch. I thought that actually worked quite well, and that's something that I did overall appreciate about the show. I think when we are focusing on the ghosts and their interaction and them just wanting to do anything they can to get rid of this couple, I actually think the show is a lot of fun. The problem is they're not the main focus of the show. The focus instead is this married couple that we're focusing on, who, as good as Rose McIver and Utkarsh and Budkar are, they really do work well together. I just found to be such a bore in this episode. I was not really into either of them. I didn't care about the marital problems that they were going through. I didn't care about how they want to renovate this building into like a full-on hotel. I didn't care about any of that because I found it to be just so rushed in that way. I didn't really feel like I got to know these characters very much at all. They did have some funny lines. I enjoyed the one line that Utkarsh and Budkar said about like role-playing HGTV. That was kind of a funny line overall, but I just didn't really latch onto their characters. I had a really hard time identifying with them, and I think that was really my fatal flaw with this show. I also feel like it's very obvious this is an adaptation of another series. It's based on a British show from the BBC, and it does often seem like the show is really playing it safe. It's not really trying to do anything that crazy because of the fact that it is an adaptation, so it needs to hit certain beats. It needs to go in certain directions, and I don't feel like a lot of them were very much earned here. I don't think they did a great job with that. I will say there was one moment here that was honestly really meaningful. It's when the character of Pete is talking about like how much he misses his wife. It's actually a very sweet moment. And then when you realize that the last conversation they had were just them arguing about donut holes, there's something that's really funny about that, but also something that's really like bittersweet. It's like I think they hit the perfect beats behind the comedy, but also this like tragedy to it. I think it's like this tinge of sadness there, and I thought they handled that balance very well. I really did enjoy the way they ended up striking that balance here, and I did like the overall ending where now Sam now is able to see these ghosts after this like freak accident. That could kind of go in an interesting direction, but overall I didn't really find this to be anything that special. I didn't hate it by any means. I actually was surprised by how much I ended up not disliking it. I just think overall as a pilot, it's pretty disposable. There wasn't a ton here that stuck out to me. I really enjoyed the ghosts overall, and I thought that they were easily the best part of that show. But as I said before, like, I just didn't really latch on to a lot of other elements here, so I can't overall say that I liked it, but it was enjoyable. I think that the show could go somewhere interesting. You know, maybe I'll give another episode, and hopefully I enjoy it more. I didn't hate it by any means. It wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it wasn't really anything that special either, so C+ for Ghosts. It's not the worst thing I've seen. It actually was quite enjoyable in many aspects, but it's a little too forgettable for me to overall say I'd recommend this one. Alright, so the next pilot I'm going to be talking about is, of course, Four Queens, and I'll just be honest, I fucking love this pilot. I think out of all of the ones that I've watched, this is the one I feel the most promising in terms of, like, they are going to be successful. I'd be very surprised if this show wasn't picked up for an additional season or a full season or whatever they do, just because I already feel like they've laid a lot of very solid groundwork within this pilot. I mean, the opening especially, it does a really strong job, I think, of setting up all the women and who they've kind of become within their lives, and I thought they did a pretty strong job with that. You know, you have, like, say, Eve's character, this mom that is she seems very successful what she does. She's a proud wife, but you can see that she has a very sort of complicated marriage that sort of adds like this tinge of bitterness to it all, and I think they do a good job with that. You know, you got Brandy, who, you know, wanted to be this big star but never really got the credit that she does. Naomi, you know, Brandy's character Naomi, who like never really got the credit that she deserves, and like is kind of like longing for that success. But then you have Valeria, who is this, she was also a member, but now she's like this reporter of sorts, and she's kind of, going down, this interesting path. So I think overall they do a good job with showing who all these women have become just through the first few minutes of this episode, and that's something that I very much did enjoy. For sure. I thought that was really great, but I also think they did a good job of showing that the Nasty Bitches as a group, isn't one that's held in that high of regard these days. Yes, they used to be this very successful girl group, but they're kind of has-beens. I mean, we get that one scene where this couple's like mistaking them for like literally another band, which I thought was really funny, but it also had this like tinge of sadness to it, because it's like, this was their passion. This was, what they once were held in high regard for, and now they're just treated like normal people. It's like that's been entirely stripped away from them. It just feels so deeply realistic in that way, where you have a band that at one point is like so successful, and then decades later, nobody even knows that they were a thing. It's just really interesting the way they went about that here, and I thought they did a good job. I will say, for the first few minutes, I actually was very connected to Valeria's character. I like the whole storyline of her being this reporter, but her not really getting that credit because of this white woman that's like very problematic, and she's trying to like expose her for things that she's doing. I thought that was a very interesting storyline, what they were deciding to do there. But I think as the show went on, Brandy's character was really the one I was most connected to. I really love what they did with Naomi. really showing that this is someone that, you know, just kind of feels like she hasn't been given that credit that she really does want. You know, she came up with the lyrics. She was the one that was supposed to be this big star, and she really hasn't been, and you can see that it's done a number on her because of that, and her performance is phenomenal here. I mean, I've seen her act before, but I've never really seen her be quite this good, and the one scene where she is, you know, talking to this guy who I can only assume she was in a past relationship with, you know, about the regrets that she's had, about the, you know, lack of success that she's had. I really did feel for her, and I think that they did a really strong job with that overall, so I was very impressed by that here. I also really like the animosity between all of these women, you know, and that's very similar to something like, say, Girls 5 Eva, but I think what this show does a better job with is that it actually explores it better. Girls 5 Eva, they kind of just, like, brought it up as a joke and, like, moved past it. Here, they really are exploring that there is a lot of animosity here. They didn't really end things on a very good note. You can especially see there's a lot of tension between Naomi and Valeria, and I'm interested in seeing, you know, how they're really going to mend that, how that's really going to end up going. There just seems to be a lot of tension between a lot of these women, and I'm interested in seeing, you know, more of what's really going to end up happening there. Are they going to be able to move past this? You know, are they kind of like trapped in this facade that, like, oh, well, us getting back together is going to turn everything around again in their lives? I'm interested in seeing how that's really going to go. But I also really like what they did with the character of Lauren, because I think she's the perfect younger sort of foil to these characters. She's deeply naive. She's, you know, has all of this success thrown at her, feels like she's on top of the world, but she is, you know, contrasted with these women whose best days are far behind them. They know what this fame feels like. They know what this success feels like. They also know how limited it is and why it's happening to her. And that talk that she has with, I believe it was Eve's character, Brianna. I could be wrong about that, but I believe it was her, since a lot of this pilot did focus on her. You know, when she's talking to her about how this is only going to last, you know, this is only going to last for a little bit, these men are going to take advantage of you, it really did get to me. And I think that Lauren is a character, she's one I'm very interested in exploring, you know, where she's really going to go. Is she going to take this advice? I want to see more of the life that she deals with, the fame that's thrown at her. All of that stuff is very intriguing to me. So I'm very interested in seeing really where that's going to go. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot I really love about this pilot. I will say at points it felt a little bit overstuffed to me, and even a little bit melodramatic. Like, Eve's character, as much as I like Brianna, the whole scene with her and her husband when she finds out that he's, like, cheating on her and she's, like, lashing out at him, it just felt a little melodramatic to me. I didn't really like the way that whole scene was played out overall. And then I felt that Jill, as a character, kind of got the short end of the stick here. I'm interested in her character, that she has this secret that, you know, she is gay. She's kind of hid that from everyone, and I'm interested in them kind of diving deeper into that, but I feel like as a character, she just didn't have quite as much to do as the others in this pilot. So I'm hoping that we dive a bit deeper into her character overall. So I'm excited to see, you know, what they really end up doing with that storyline. But I mean, other than that, there's so much to love about this one. The music as well is so good. I really was loving all of the music throughout this. I think all the women work so well together. I did feel like the ending was a little bit abrupt, with them just randomly skipping to like 6 months later, where I guess the rest of the show, or at least this season, is going to be them going on this tour. So I'm excited to see how that's going to play out. But I mean, overall, I think the show has so much potential behind it. I think it has so much interesting stuff to say about fame and how limiting that can really be, how limiting that success can be, and what happens when reality really does, like, settle in. But also, you know, different things like sexism and, you know, sexism within the music industry and things like that. I think the show is touching upon a lot of those things very well. Obviously, you know, some race issues as well, but they really leaned heavily, I think, into the sexism in this episode, and I'm excited excited to see more of what the show really does there. I think there's so much potential behind this pilot. I'm very excited to see where this can go. Like I said, for me, this was easily the strongest one so far. If I had to pick a show that is going to be, you know, the biggest success and is going to be one that I think is probably going to last longer than one season, it will be this show. I do see the show growing a big fan base. I do see the show having a life outside of just this video. I think in general, this show is going to be immensely successful. I think if you love Girls 5 Evo, this is definitely the kind of show for you, especially if you want a little bit more character development. I think this is definitely the kind of show to watch. So A- for Queens. I was a big fan of this pilot for sure. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the final pilot here that I will be discussing, and that is for 4400. And I'm not going to lie, I was very hesitant going into this one. Any CW show these days, I just don't have a lot of faith in. I feel like all of their shows are very similar. They all have the same sort of look and feel, and they cast the same type of actors, and I'm just not very impressed. But I gotta say, this pilot, honestly, I really was impressed by. I won't lie, for the first, 5 minutes, I wasn't really feeling it. You know, with seeing this couple and them in bed, and Rihanna playing in the background, it just felt like a copy and paste of every CW show that's out there. Everything felt so recycled to me. Once we dived into the concept a little bit further though, I actually was liking this quite a bit. I think all the characters being from different timelines actually works very well. It creates this really interesting sort of story where you have these characters going through similar experiences, but they're all reacting to it differently. They're all going through it in different ways. Whether you have, this doctor from the early 1900s that kind of looks at things in a very black or white way, feels like women shouldn't be given these freedoms, doesn't understand why women would be given these freedoms, but it's already seems to be sort of coming to terms with that. Or you have a woman who's a lawyer in the 2000s and, she doesn't understand, and while she's definitely a little bit more up to speed with some things, she still doesn't understand, she's still just as appalled when she realizes that RBG is dead, which I thought was one of the most effective scenes of the episode, is everyone reacting to RBG dying. I thought they did a good job with that, and I think overall it's going to make for some very insightful storytelling with what they ended up doing there. I think the show is a really good job of showing there's a lot of racial tension throughout the world and it's never really gone away, and how these characters feel like 2021 is going to be better. This is going to be this safe haven for them, and you can see that that is not the case with the way these cops treat them and things like that. I think the show is diving into that very well. That being said, it's not exactly subtle about it, but that wasn't necessarily an issue for me. It's on the nose for sure, but I think overall they did a pretty good job with that. I also liked a lot of the acting here. I think overall, I don't recognize many of these actors, but I really did find myself impressed by pretty much everyone. The only person I didn't like that much is that one guy that Shanice runs into, not her husband, but that other guy that she was talking to. I wasn't a fan of him at all, but the main cast I really love quite a bit. I think Brittany Adebalmo is a fantastic lead. I think she carries the show very well. I think she has the passion, she has the drive. You really find yourself latching onto her character, but she's also just very charismatic in the role, and I enjoyed what she ended up doing here. But the other big standout for me was Jay Lattimore, who plays Claudette. Never seen her before, but I really hope we see more of her after this. I really liked her character a lot. You felt like this was someone from the 1960s, but is already starting to, acclimate to the times, and I think she did a really good job with that, and I really like the bond that's formed between Claudette and Reverend Jansen. It seems like this could be the heart of the show. I liked their back and forth overall. It seems like this is someone that Claudette kind of needs during these times, and I'm excited to see, more of that, so I think they did a pretty good job, with that overall. And like I said, I think the show dives into a lot of heavy race issues, very well. Also, police brutality, gentrification, they're all covered with a lot of promise. Obviously, yeah, it's not covered to the deepest degree since it's a pilot, but I think they hinted the fact that we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more of what's going on there. And I think that's something that was very well done. And Shanice, as I said before, is a really great lead. I think it was definitely the smart choice to have her really be like the anchor of this series. You know, the dilemma that she has where she wants to reconnect with this family, but this family's like completely moved on without her. She's nothing to them. You know, that scene where she shows up at the door and she's trying to reconnect with her daughter, she's trying to reconnect with her husband, you know, they don't really think much of her at all because they just think she up and left. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, they don't know that she disappeared. They don't know where she went. They just assume that she's been living all this time. And I think that's what makes her character, you know, so interesting in that way, because all these other characters, you know, you can tell they're from different decades, but with Shanice, you know, this is someone that was just in the early 2000s. So it really hasn't been that long. You know, it was like 2005, I believe, 2007. So it hasn't been that long since she's disappeared, and you can see that Logan has especially moved on without her. But it seems like that love that he has for Shanice is still very much there, and I'm excited to see, hopefully, them reconnecting. I'm going to predict that they probably are going to reconnect, maybe this first season, maybe not, but we'll see what happens there. I will say there are a couple things that do hold the show back. One, I did not care very much about these cop characters. I enjoyed them a little bit more as we were wrapping things up, especially when we dived a little bit deeper into Jarrell as a character and sort of like why he cares so much about helping them out, in contrast to Keisha, who I really did not care about at all. Like, I could not get into her character very much at all here. You know, she believes that this is like very by the book. She doesn't really believe in a lot of the supernatural stuff that's happening, but it seems like, you know, towards the end, she starts to be a bit more, you know, welcome to the idea of it. That's the other thing. I don't really like the supernatural elements here. I don't really find them necessary. I don't think they were presented all that well. It kind of just felt like an afterthought to me. Like, they thought they needed a bit more of a hook, but I think the hook of all of these people disappearing from different decades and then being plucked into 2021, I think that's enough of a hook. That's intriguing enough. Like, what's the reasoning behind this? Who did this? Like, that's what is more interesting to me. I don't really care about them getting these like regenerative powers and like, you know, and say, you know, I don't really care about you know, some of these people like Claudette having this like healing ability. I don't really care about stuff like that. It just didn't really interest me all that much. So yeah, I mean, maybe I'll come around to it, but right now I just don't really feel that attached to that part of the show. Also, there's some characters here that I just felt kind of got the short end of the stick in this pilot, particularly Mildred and Hayden. I honestly forgot that they were here. Every time Mildred came on screen, I didn't know who she was. I didn't understand what she was supposed to be. And then, you know, I like the idea that she's from the 70s, but she just feels a bit one note to me. And then Hayden, they made up for it at the end when we realized that he actually knows Jarrell's brother. It seems like he knows what's happened to him. So I'm excited to see what's going on there. I'm sure they're going to give him more to do, but I wanted more from him in this episode for sure. I definitely think they could have done more there. The one character I really didn't like was LaDonna. I feel like she's just supposed to be like the comedic relief. She's from 2015. She's very rich. She's very like spoiled in that way. She just wants to go to a party, and I'm just not that attached to her right now. I hope that they dive a bit deeper into her character, because I think all the other characters here, they're doing a good job of showing them, you know, coming from their timeline and seeing how things haven't changed that much, but trying to have like an optimistic view of everything. And with LaDonna, I just really found myself annoyed by her, so I wasn't a big fan of her overall. I think Kalia Johnson, you know, she's doing a good job in the role, but it all just feels kind of one note to me, and I just wasn't a huge fan of her. But other than that, I was honestly pleasantly surprised by this pilot. I think the show seems very intriguing. There's a very, you know, compelling mystery going on here. I'm just hoping it doesn't fall into the trappings of like other CW shows where like they wrap things up too quickly, they don't know how to end it. I want to see them drag this out because I want to focus more on these characters. I want to focus more on who they are. I think they could do a better job. I also hope we do get flashbacks to like who they were before this, because I'm not gonna lie, I didn't feel that impacted by them suddenly just being dropped in. I think that the impact was kind of missing for me because it all just felt a little bit rushed. We focused a lot on we focused a lot on Shanice here, who is our main character, of course, so we need to. but I hope that we get that same focus with all of the other characters, because I want to know more about them. I'm intrigued by them, and I think they did a good job with that. There's a little bit too much exposition, and I think at times it can be a bit disorienting and kind of take me out of things, but overall, I was very pleasantly surprised by this pilot. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought it was going to. B for 4,400. Really, really liking this one, and I hope that it very much does live up to its potential here. And with that, we're done here, guys. And I gotta say, I honestly was pleasantly surprised by this pilot season. There was a lot more that I actually ended up enjoying than ones that I didn't. At the end of the day, there's only 3 here that I didn't like, and that's much better than the previous one where the odds were more negative than positive. I actually think there's a lot of promise towards a bunch of these shows. I've been watching some of them regularly since I started this, and they've honestly gotten really good. So yeah, I overall enjoyed this pilot season quite a bit. I actually enjoyed doing this video this time around, which is not something I was able to say last time. So I'll definitely be continuing to do these. Hopefully I'll do these for the mid-season as well, because I know there's a lot of more shows coming out in the mid-season than usual. So I'll probably try to, I'll probably try to make a follow-up one when that comes around. But other than that, guys, for this video, hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think of any of these pilots, of course. Love to hear your thoughts on them. Which ones do you think will be successful? Which ones are you really enjoying right now? That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.